Okay. Hi everybody. So, obviously I'm not in school today, so I am bringing politics, new directions, and new uncertainties to you guys. Awesome. So we're going to start with Industrial Revolution in Imperial Russia. So we always know that Russia is kind of, lagging behind. But they're actually starting to catch up during this time period, and this is a lot due to Count Sergei Witte, who was alive from 1849 to 1915, and he's the Minister of Finance in Russia from 1892 to 1903. Pause me at any time if I'm going too fast. So he created a surge of state-sponsored industrialism. This is especially railroads. From 1900, during 1900, 35,000 miles of railroads and Trans-Siberian railroads were created in Russia. Awesome stuff, cool. He also instituted protective tariffs and persuaded Tsar Nicholas, who was the Tsar at the time from 1849 to 1917, that foreign capital was necessary for industrial growth in Russia. He also spurned the growth of modern steel and coal industry in the Ukraine, and in 1900, Russia, Ukraine being part of Russia, was the largest producer of steel and coal, which is awesome. So this brought on the traditional factories, industrial working class, bad working conditions, living conditions, etc., that always comes with industrialization, and socialist parties and thought. So, these socialist parties were repressed by the government, the Tsar, and everything like that, and they became revolutionary. One example of this is the Marxist Social Democratic Party. They held their first congress in Minsk in 1898, and their leaders were arrested at this time. And the second conference was held in Brussels in 1903, and it was attended by a whole bunch of Russian immigrants. And these groups, all these socialist groups, were well known for political terrorism and attempted assassination of government officials to get what they're looking for. So the big revolution that comes out of this, or the first one, not the revolution, was the Revolution of 1905. Remember 1905. So this sprung out of the Russian defeat in the Russo-Japanese War. Russia was going through some territorial expansion, especially northern Korea, which led to a confrontation with Japan because they were not happy with this. Stop it. So on February 8th, 1904, they were surprise attacked by the Japanese on Port Arthur, and the Russian response was to take their Baltic fleet and go east, which was a long journey, and they were defeated by the Japanese Navy at Tsushima Strait when they finally collided head-to-head. And in 1905, Russia sued for peace, which was very surprising to all the world powers because this was a relatively Western power, industrial power that was surrendering to an Asian country, which was not seen done at the time. So this led to internal discontent and political upheaval in Russia. So big problems at the time. You're going to want to write this down. The bourgeoisie was angry by the conservative government and they wanted liberalism. The important part is they wanted liberalism. Nationalities, other obviously than the 40% Russian minority, were angered by the subjugation that they were subjugated by the Russians. And the peasants lacked arable land. Doesn't matter that they didn't have enough money to cultivate the land, they just didn't have the land to cultivate. And they didn't have the money. Also, urban laborers were angered by the bad working and living conditions that arose from fast industrialization and factories and all that. And there were food shortages caused by a breakdown of the railroad during the Russo-Japanese War. This all led to Bloody Sunday on January 9th, 1905, which was a massive procession of workers who marched on the Tsar's Winter Palace to present a petition of grievances. And unfortunately, troops opened fire on this, and they killed hundreds of people, which launched the revolution. And ethnic groups revolted after this, and peasants burned their landowners' homes. After all this revolt happening, on 1905 there was a general strike, and Nicholas II created the October Manifesto as a result, which extended some civil liberties, and created the Duma, which was a legislative assembly that was elected directly. And this satisfied the moderates, and then the moderates gave their support to the czars, who were suppressing the workers' uprising, the workers who were not satisfied by the October Manifesto. And so this was obviously a failed revolution because of that. And some more reform that rose out of this, we have Peter Stolypin, who was the Tsar's chief advisor from late 1906 until 1911 when he was assassinated. And he created agrarian reform, which came in the form of private land ownership for peasants. But in 1907, Tsar Nicholas cut the Duma's power, the legislative body we talked about before, and especially after the death of Stolypin, he relied heavily on his army and bureaucracy to lead, not for helping the people. So, moving on to the United States. The United States moved very quickly from an agrarian society to industrialized society. From 1860 to 1914, this happened. And cities grew. About 4/5 of the city population came from migration. So that was huge. And they were the world's richest we were the world's richest nation and the greatest industrial power. Unfortunately, there was an unequal distribution of wealth. The top 9% had 71% of the wealth. There were also, as in other industrialized countries, unsafe working conditions and unemployment, which led to unionization to try and protest. The most famous union was, in 1900, the American Federation of Labor. They were the dominant one, but they had no real power, so they couldn't really affect change. The reform came around during the Progressive Era, which was also the 1900. So this reform came in the form of economic and social legislation. They first moved to make state laws, which became largely ineffective, and then they moved to national laws, which were more effective, such as the 1906 Meat Inspection Act, the 1905 Pure Food and Drug Act, and those made by Woodrow Wilson, president from 1913 to 1921, which was the federal income tax and the Federal Reserve System. So what's really important about this is, as in other industrialized countries in Europe, there was an extension of state functions, state being the national government, as opposed to local governments. And this isn't just the monarchy ruling, this is like the monarchy taking control of things like social programs or legislation, things like that, which they left to a laissez-faire system before. Moving on to Canada. So Canada was having problems with national unity. So they had distrusted the French-speaking Canadian minority, distrusted the English-speaking majority, who were also Canadians, until Wilfrid Laurier from 1841 to 1919 became the first Canadian Prime Minister in 1896. First French-Canadian Prime Minister, before they were all English-Canadian Prime Ministers. And he was able to reconcile the two groups. He also created an industrialization boom. Yay! Because of him, a lot of immigration happened from Europe, especially Europe, which helped populate the west of Canada because Canada was so sparsely populated that they didn't have the manpower to be able to do what other industrialized countries were doing. So that's all I have. Have fun with our bingo. Bye, everybody.